I hope that my thoughts are something which will be useful to the clinical research evidence community. But I must mention as a disclaimer, what I say is my own thought and not on any other organization. I don't represent other organizations. If you look at the challenges, really, historically in India, somehow people still think of participation in a clinical trial as a kind of guinea pig syndrome. So we have to sort of think of how to get the population or the general people in the country to think of clinical research as one of the very required or essential thing if we really want to have evidence base for developing policies or for even treatment of patients. With that's the attitude of the general population. If we look at the attitude of the industry as well, historically most of the drugs developed in the country have been generic, so we didn't really seriously need to look at safety efficacy because that data was already available from international studies and so on. So the clinical trials being done in the country were not really taken seriously. The generic drugs required only for showing bioavailability. But as we move on now, we have huge opportunity. Our opportunity is now two ways. One is that we now have, as Economic Times itself covers from time to time, drugs which are completely new drugs being developed in India, and that requires a completely different approach towards things, because now you have a new product which you have to show the efficacy and the effectiveness and the safety of it and the works of it through various phases of clinical trial, the post marketing. So that's one huge opportunity, which is like taking a molecule from start to the end is not a easy thing. So that's a great opportunity. The other great opportunity is because of India's perceived and actual economic growth. The international community is very keen on doing the studies in India. They perceive it as an opportunity to market to this large population. But we can look at it as a quick access to new drugs, which is a good thing, and maybe at a lower cost, because if the studies are done in India well, then we can look for the product being marketed in India at a low cost. So that kind of a public health or social sort of objective can be kept in mind. So because the international global community is also interested in the studies in India, so we have a really good opportunity. And I think we have the, you can say, all the nuts and bolts of it. It just probably needs to be put together to launch a very, I mean, it has been done. I'm not saying that it's not being done, but the scale at which we are growing, that requires a right approach for it. Yeah. So there was a time when when we were doing multicentric, multinational clinical trial. The drug regulation said that every clinical trial to be done in India had to be one phase below what is happening internationally. So if internationally it's a phase 3 study being done, then India has to be doing phase 2 study. In fact, we were the first one asking international study doing at the same phase 3 internationally and in India. And we had the drug controller really thinking it's not, and then we said it's a something, because there is always in our regulation, there is always this thing about what is needed for the country. There is that flexibility there. So we said this is an anti-malarial, so needed for the country. So with that, he gave us the approval, but it took him a long time to be able to be convinced. But today, those kind of restrictive rules are not there. We still have some restrictive rules, because it's still again a mindset that whether India is being used into quotes for clinical trials. So we still have few restrictions, like phase 1 study developed outside not being done in India. But I'm sure we are sort of slowly getting there. And also the various regulations about academic trials being not requiring actually the controller, but an intimation and waiting for some period of time. And also some things about how quickly the studies can be approved, and also a pre-study kind of a dialogue with the regulators. So these are all the regulations which are there. And from quality point of view, it's important that ethics committees have to be registered. clinical trials have to be registered in CTRI. That all gives a lot more credibility and quality assurance, as one may call it. Yeah. Yeah. So in there has been an immense amount of basic research going on globally on enormous amount of research on cell biology and disease mechanisms and so on. So all that has resulted into a large number of very very innovative drugs, be it for cancer or be it for cell therapies or be it for gene therapies. So these are all some things which are revolutionized kind of the drugs available to the country. So if we have to be able to be ready for that, so I would say that at a practicing clinician level, at a high level, uh, the amount of knowledge absorption by the high level or tertiary care institution has been huge. So they know what's happening internationally in the scientific side, and they're all willing and waiting to see how these can be made use of in our country. We have to think about the lower part of the pyramid also, how they will get access to it, because at times they are the ones who need it more. And especially if we have products which will say shorten the treatment duration and in effect will reduce the hospitalization cost, or in effect reduce the number of time they have to go to. These are the ones which are hugely useful to a country, so therefore the lower sector. So we need to be ready to be able to do clinical trials in the patient who need them most. So if the population that needs, you don't do the trial in them, but you go and do it in another big setup because it's easy to do, then you basically lost the point. Yeah. Sometimes the startups and the society is all in a rush. We all want things quickly. We don't have the patience required really. Not always patience, but even the mindset to be able to make sure that we are doing things of the right quality. We have the right sort of ways of handling things, so that in trying to do things quickly, we are not cutting corners, and we are not jeopardizing safety of the patient. So all that is important. And also it is important to see as to how uh, ethnically or culturally or economically our society is different. So any product or anything that comes needs to be looked at from these kind of intrinsic and extrinsic socio-economic factors. Uh, so that can happen if the developers are in sync with the society. I tell my student that if you have developed a plan or proposal, and if you want to know whether you're on the right track, just go and ask your grandmother. If she understands what you're doing and she agrees with what you want to do, then you're on the right track. So uh, no point in just sitting in one lab and doing what you or what the chatbot tells you, but you need to go down and go and see what's happening in the world around you. We have what are often called as therapeutic orphans. We call them therapeutic orphans because when the drug development process takes place, they are nowhere in the development process, and suddenly then they are provided with a drug. Here is a drug, use it. And that happens to gender as a important thing. And also, as I mentioned in my talk, also in underdeveloped areas and remote areas, tribals and so on. But women in particular important. A, because there are some diseases and disorders which are very predominant in women, like just anemia and deficiency anemia, which will happen much more in women. And then some disease manifestations are different, and also well, in our country they don't come up with the disease manifestations or don't come to the doctor, neglect themselves. I mean, there's so many gender related issues. But I think overall, patient participation itself, I mean, organization like yourself, Economic Times, and other related things, they need to have people to understand the importance of participating in research and not hesitating from it. But at the same breath, I will also say those who are the researchers also need to understand the limitations and the needs of this society.